Hello, friends, and welcome to my channel. Do you know that when you're praying, sometimes it seems like forever before God responds, and we can often feel challenged and conflicted in our waiting process. But tonight, I want to talk about ways that you can wait and know that God is working while you are waiting. We'll talk about it in today's video. Let's go. Sunday. Sunday, 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 Sunday school. Sunday, 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 Sunday. Sunday, 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 Sunday school. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. My name is Waynell Henson. You're on that Sunday School Girls channel. And here I make Christian content that is inspired by and or based on the Sunday school lesson, serving both the legacy content series and the international lesson. And tonight I am here to do the review and lead a conversation on this week's international lesson that is entitled Zechariah Hears from God. I'm excited about talking about tonight's lesson and I can't wait to get into it with you. But before I do, I want to certainly say again, hello to everyone. Glad you're here. If you're a newbie, I want to welcome you as a first timer into this community. I know that you're going to be blessed. Do me a favor, look down below and click that subscribe button. In fact, everyone do that. Make sure that you are connected to this channel. And then I need everyone to go ahead and click that thumbs up like button. It lets YouTube know that you appreciate this content and it also helps to curate your experience. So again, glad that you're here. Make sure that you've done those two things. Get your notebooks ready, your Bibles, your journals, whatever you use in your time of study. And we are going to be taking a look at this lesson. I also want to let you know, I want to go back to doing something fundamental that I have not done in a while, and that's to share with you why we make these lesson reviews. These lesson reviews are literally to encourage you to make God's word a part of your everyday life. And it's easy to do that through Sunday school curriculum. There are daily readings that you can take advantage of. And I hope that you've joined me each day this week for the daily reading challenge. But secondly, I do want you to be prepared if you're going into a Sunday school setting, especially as a teacher or a superintendent, a great student. I want you to be prepared to participate in the discussion. But most of all, I want you to be able to find life applicable learnings that you can take. Every single one of us is working to be the best version of ourselves and to be all that God has created us to be. And I believe that his word helps us to find that. Let's go tonight to St. Luke chapter 1, St. Luke chapter 1. And this is where our lesson will come this week. I am actually going to share with you an encore presentation of this lesson. We had this lesson in December of 2016 under a different title, but the same substantive content. And in all honesty, when I reviewed the lesson, I don't have anything to add to what I shared in that lesson, but I thought it was interesting because I literally wanted to see how much things have changed from, that was 6 years ago teaching that lesson, and literally wanted to hear sort of where I was at that point in my life and where I am now. And I think that it will lend itself to the discussion that I want to have after we've watched that video. So grab your Bibles. As a matter of fact, oops, I don't have my other Bible in here with me. I want to read, oh, here we go. I want to read our lesson passage. We're going to pray. I'll read the passage and then we'll play the video. And then I'll be back to talk a little bit more about waiting on God in seasons when our prayers just don't seem like they are being answered. Father, we thank you for this day and this time. Thank you for the opportunity to study your word. Thank you that your word unearths truth to us and helps us to navigate life in seasons that feel difficult, but remind us of the truth of who you are, that you are so present, that we are inside of your perfect plan, and that you never forget that we are here and that you are always working on our behalf. Bless those who are here now and even those who will catch the replay. We love you. We give you glory. In Jesus' name, amen. This is from the NIV version. Once when Zechariah's division was on duty and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And when the time for burning of incense came, all the assembled worshipers were praying outside. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled and gripped with fear. But the angel said to him,
Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife, Elizabeth, will bear you a son, and you are to call him John. He will be a joy and delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth. For he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He is never to take wine or other fermented drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before he is born. He will bring back many of the people of Israel to the Lord their God, and he will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah, and turn the hearts of parents to their children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. Zechariah asked the angel, "How can I be sure of this? I am an old man, and my wife is well along in years." The angel said to him, "I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and tell you this good news. And now you will be silent and not able to speak until the day this happens, because you did not believe my words, which will come true at their appointed time." So the joy of Sunday school is that we get the chance to really dig in and see how the lesson pieces click and fit together. And so as we are in St. Luke chapter 1 for the third week, it's interesting how the writers have approached it. So we started sort of in the middle, looking at the story of Mary. We saw the visitation of the angel Gabriel, who told her about the son that she would have. And then we saw her visit with her cousin Elizabeth. So if you missed those lessons, go back and check out the last 2 weeks' videos. For this week, we actually go back to the top of chapter 1. So we've talked a bit about Elizabeth and we've heard the name Zechariah, but now we get to see how all of this really, really fits together. The other things that we see fit together are just how Old Testament and New Testament are connected. So before we jump into St. Luke chapter 1, you should go back and take a look at Malachi chapter 3. And there you'll find God's last words in the Old Testament, the last words until this point of St. Luke chapter 1, until we see this story. In Malachi, God is preparing his people for what is to come. And that was written some 300 years before Jesus was born. What you'll see is, "Behold, I will send my messenger, and he will prepare the way for me. And the Lord whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant, whom ye delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts." And what he says is, "I am coming, but before I do, there will be a prophet or a preacher who will come." And he's basically going to lay out the red carpet for what is to come. And we know that would be Jesus Christ actually coming in the flesh. Also check out Malachi 4 verses 5 and 6. "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse." Keep those scriptures handy as you get down through St. Luke chapter 1 in this lesson. Again, what we see is that there is a prophet who is coming, and one of the results of his ministry is going to be to turn the hearts to of fathers to their children, and children to their fathers. And so then there's this space of like 400 years where there is no writing and there is no prophet speaking. So we have generations who have gotten away from that writing and that teaching and the word coming directly from God. And there's this silence until we're here in St. Luke chapter 1. We start at verse 8, and we see the story of a man named Zechariah. And he's gone to the temple. The temple is the place where God's people would go to meet with him, the place where they made atonement for sin, where sacrifices were made. There was the shedding of blood for the remission of sin. And the people came to worship God. And the priests were the ones who offered the sacrifice in the temple, and Zechariah was one of those priests. We also see a second character, and that is his wife, Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth's name means God's oath, and Elizabeth is from the line of Aaron. She is from a ministry family, generations and generations of ministry. Now, Zacharias he's just a priest. He's not anyone important, but his name means the Lord remembers. Now, as we look at them as a couple, here's what we find out about them: that they're righteous before God and they walk according to his statute. They love God and they serve him. We know that they are old. We know that they are past childbearing years. They are like Abraham and Sarah in that they were barren. And I want to talk about that for a minute. Now, I'm not married. I don't have children. And so I don't know what it's like to struggle with infertility, but I certainly can identify what it feels like not to have a child. But certainly inside of a marriage, not to be able to produce really put them in a place where she as a woman would have felt ashamed, possibly abused by others' words, disgraced. I'm sure that other women talked about her. People may have said they're such leaders in the church, but they can't possibly be that important. Maybe they've done something wrong because God didn't choose them to multiply. When she would go to draw water in her village, I'm sure that women looked down their noses at her. When she would go out and see other women who were pregnant and look at how God had blessed and honored them, she would likely be sad. But most of all, economically, they had no one to help them reproduce in what they did. And then they had no one to help look after them when they became old. Now, I tease about that. And I say that's why I'm very nice to my niece, because she's going to take care of Auntie when she gets old. But that was a very serious struggle. And even today, I want to be intentional about saying that there are couples today who very much struggle with infertility, and they certainly need our prayers and our sensitivities as they work through that challenge. The other thing that we know about Zacharias is that he is a priest in the middle of nowhere. We learned last week that they lived in the hill country, and we talked about Mary having to journey 80 to 100 miles to get to where they were. So a small place, likely poor. And again, they have no children. And so often children for married couples represent security and significance, and in many cases, identity. And because Elizabeth was barren, quite frankly, Zacharias had legal grounds to divorce her, but he stayed with her because he loved her. And note that unlike Abraham and Sarah, they did not take matters into their own hands, trying to fix the situation in which they found themselves. Now, only priests from a particular lineage could serve in the temple. And over the years, the number of priests had multiplied. There were like 20,000 priests at the time of Jesus. And so they had to use a system to determine who would serve that day in the temple. And that system was drawing lots or casting lots. And the lot would serve to determine who would serve in a given day. But it only fell to a priest once in his lifetime. So to a godly man like Zacharias, this was probably the biggest event of his entire life. It was a tremendous privilege, but it was really like a bad game of eeny, meeny, miny, mo. So if you can remember what it felt like to be like the line leader in elementary school, like when your day came up, that was like a big deal. Like you wanted to either be the line leader or the tail, because the tail got to turn the light off when you went to lunch and recess. So with like 150 to 200 priests showing up for work every week, this was really like the super cool job of the day. And so drawing lots again was how they determined who would serve. On this day, it was meaningful and significant again because this would likely only happen once in a lifetime, that he would minister before the Lord. And I'm sure Zacharias had to wonder as he entered the holy place if God would say something or do something special in his life on this special day. God did want to do something special, and we'll see that in the lesson. As he goes in, he goes to burn incense. According to the law of Moses, incense was offered to God on the golden altar every morning and every evening, and we see that in Exodus chapter 30, verses 7 and 8. While this is taking place in the temple, the people around know what time it is, and the lesson tells us that it is the time of burning of incense. So it's likely afternoon, and the people are outside praying. And when they see the men go into the temple, they know that the hour of incense, the time to offer incense, had come. And they knew that it was their time to pray for the entire nation. Now, most of us are familiar with what it means to have to wait. And waiting is not always fun, because we want to know the end result. We want to know how things are going to work out, and we want to know it now. But Zacharias and Elizabeth have been waiting, and they haven't just been waiting. They've been waiting a long time. But please note that while they waited, they continued to serve. They did not get angry with God. They did not withdraw from service and hold back on their time, talent, resources, their ability. They continued to serve. And we're all waiting on something. I'm waiting on something. You're waiting on something. And even though we don't know what the details look like, our jobs are to put ourselves in a place, in a space that says, God, I am going to trust you. And so Zacharias, this priest, at this culminating moment in his ministry, it was enough that he was chosen in the temple that day to serve. But as he finishes, something great and wonderful happens. An angel appears. And the angel is a great and awesome creature. Now, I mentioned this last week. Let's just talk about this. Even though we like angel figurines and we see paintings and drawings of angels that look really beautiful, if an angel shows up here, this great and awesome creature, that's going to be a problem. I'm going to be a little bit nervous. Something this beautiful shows up and starts talking. Yeah, so that's exactly what happened with Zacharias. And so the first thing the angel says is the exact same thing that angel said to Mary. Look, I know I'm intimidating, but don't be afraid. Fear not. And then he immediately states the fact that his prayers have been heard. This is why I'm here. I'm here to give you a message. Your prayers have been heard. How does it feel to pray for so long for something that you want so badly, and then to know that God hears your prayers? That's an encouragement to us. The prayers of him and his wife Elizabeth for a son, and he confirms that they would have a son. Now, angels are ministers or messengers that minister on behalf of God, and they're mentioned 23 times in the book of St. Luke. And the name he gives, which is John, means God is gracious. Now, this part of the lesson jumped out at me just because if you've kept up with the daily readings, it was important because the angel gives a name. God has sent a message that this is this child's name. Read down after verse 56, around 56, 57, 58, that after this child is born, they, the people, the community, take the custom of naming the child, and they were going to call him Junior. But his mother says, no, that's not his name. His name is John. And the reason this jumped out to me is because so often we allow people to call our children by names that God did not call them. And so I think we have to be careful about allowing others to put names or labels on children when we know what God has called them. And we're about to see with John what God has said about him. He said that he would be a source of joy and gladness to his parents and even to other people who would be happy that he was born. The next thing about John is that he is going to be great. Even before this child is born, greatness was spoken over his life. He's the son of a nobody from nowhere, poor people, and yet the word over his life is that he would be great. Now, great is important because earlier in chapter 1, look forward, you'll see a reference to Herod the Great. Herod was the person called great. He was a mighty king. He built buildings. He had money. He had people that followed him. And yet John would also be called great, not because he would do those things, but because he would live a life that was humbly serving God. Note here that we have to watch what the world defines as great and what we know to be great in the kingdom, because the definitions are starkly different. They don't look the same. The other thing about John is that he's just not going to be able to do what other people do. And when you have a marked call on your life, there are things that God will call you out of and separate you away from because you just can't do what other people do. I used to ask a lot. I used to feel like my grandfather, I won't say he picked on me, but he certainly singled me out. There were things that my cousins could do, my sister, my brother could do, and he wouldn't say a word. And I would do it and he would call me out, and I'm like, why are you picking on me? And I believe that it's because he saw something different in me. Not about love, not that others wouldn't do something, but there was something different that he saw in me. And John, very much like that, was called out to do something different. And there were things that he could do, but because of the special call on his life, because of the special work, and for the sake of his witness, there were things that he would not be able to do. And that thing in particular was he would not be allowed to drink wine or strong drink. Now, I suspect that this will be a point of conversation in many classes. The only thing I'll say about that is that there are freedoms that we all have. And we are all free to pursue those. But inside of the freedom, we have to know our own limitations. And we have to know that inside of freedom is a personal choice. And we have to make the choices that please God. Now, what we know about drinking is we're free to drink. We're not free to be drunk. And in my assessment, it is my personal choice to consciously trade that freedom for the sake of my witness. And so it's not that we can't drink, but for the sake of my witness, it is a choice that I make not to drink. Just thought I would throw that in because I know it's coming up this week. And we learn that from the time the child is in his mother's womb, he would be filled with the Spirit. And we saw that last week when Mary arrived and he leapt in his mother's womb. Verses 16 and 17 cross-reference him back to Malachi, the scriptures I gave you at the beginning, and you'll see word for word the scope and the effect of the ministry that John would have. And we see that his specific role was to prepare the way for Jesus Christ. Now, verses 18 and 19 give us Zechariah's response. Now, Zechariah's special day, big moment, angel appears, message from God. His response should have been like, yeah, listen, God said he heard my prayer. Go back and tell God I said thank you. But no, that's not what he did. Here's the problem. Zacharias opened his mouth and he asked questions like, how do I know? I'm old. My wife is old. And the angel's probably standing there like, hey, you've been praying for this. You were asking for this. You came here to pray for this. You asked God to show up in your situation. I show up and tell you that God has answered, and now you forgot what you prayed for. And so the angel basically responds and says, apparently you don't know who I am, so let me help you out. I am Gabriel, and I stand in the presence of God. I love that. I stand in the presence of God. And just as a side note, again, there are only two named angels in the Bible, Gabriel and Michael. So when Gabriel shows up, that's a pretty big deal, and he's come to give a message. And so because of Zacharias's disbelief, he is disciplined for his disbelief. And that discipline is that from that day until the child is born, he is not able to speak. He is disciplined for disbelief. So I've heard some say Elizabeth won twice on that day. She gets a baby and she got a silent husband for 9 months. But I think the lesson there is to stop talking so much. Sometimes our words get in the way of what God is trying to do. And sometimes we don't need to say anything at all. We just need to chill and wait. And all of this happened because of the time of preparation for the coming of Jesus Christ, who would ultimately take away the sin and the shame in the world. Here were my key learnings from this week. God is faithful to his promise, and you can always trust God. When it seems like things are impossible, God will send a miracle, and his word always comes to pass. Even the parts that we find challenging or we can't figure out the details of, when he speaks a word concerning us, his word, the one thing his word cannot do is come back to him void. In other words, without accomplishing the very thing that he sent it to do. So his word always comes to pass. What do we do when God doesn't give us the things that we want or do the things for us that we want him to do? Note that God had not changed Zacharias and Elizabeth's situation, but they continued to love him. They continued to serve him. We cannot be bitter when God doesn't come through in the ways that we think he should, or when he doesn't come through on our timeline. We have to be encouraged through this example that even when God hasn't answered, and sometimes he'll answer yes, sometimes he'll answer no, sometimes he answers later. And maybe we never get it, but for Zacharias and Elizabeth, later finally came, but they never stopped praying. They never stopped loving. They never stopped serving. They never stopped worshiping. They never stopped believing. I mentioned my grandfather, but one thing about him as well is I love to hear him pray. And he's even in a nursing home now, but one of my favorite lines when he prays is, he says, God, you are the boss. And whatever you say and whatever you do is okay with me. So God is the boss. God's timing has more to do with his will being accomplished in us rather than our personal desires. And so keep in mind that his timing is just not ours, but that his greater will is always accomplished when he allows. We have to remember and rehearse what God has said specifically about our children.
Remember and rehearse what God has said. I'm so conscious of what people say and what media says and what statistics say, but you reserve the right to call your child by the name that God has given you for your child and to speak over your child what you know to be right and true. God has kept his eye on you, even when other people have discounted you. Think about again, Zacharias and Elizabeth and that label of being barren, being old, and being discounted by others. And yet God had not taken his eye off of them, and nor had he turned his ear from their prayer. Lastly, this week, I want you to know that I know many couples who are desiring and praying for children, and they are struggling with infertility. They want to show the love of their union through a child. And so I want you to know that I am sensitive to that. And this week, you are at the top of my prayer list. If I can pray for you, if I don't know you and you want me to add you by name to the list, inbox me, and I promise you have my confidentiality. And for those that I know, and specifically those who have asked me to pray with you, I am doing that this week because I know that there is nothing too hard for God, and that when man says that something is impossible, that's when God has the opportunity to do his best work in delivering miracles. This is the lesson for this week. I pray that you will be blessed in your time of study. If you picked up something in the lesson, because, hey, I can only tell so much, and I'm probably over 15 minutes, but hey, we can only do so much in 15-ish minutes, right? But if you picked up something from the lesson that is meaningful and related to our learning targets, like I don't want to debate ages or anything like that, but if it's learning target related, I would love to hear about it. So leave your comments. Otherwise, time for me to get back to outlining. Y'all pray for me tomorrow. We're going to knock it out and get it done. That's it for me, and I will see you in Sunday school. Bye-bye.
Well, all righty. Welcome back from that encore presentation of this week's lesson. I enjoyed reading the comments and sharing along with you. And I think someone commented on the hair. That's throwback hair. Still got my gray hair. We're still gray. I look a little different, but it's still me. I still get credit, right? That's me. But I did want to spend just a few more minutes because I do think it is so interesting to hear the lesson and hear what I was thinking. Again, this has been 6 years since that particular lesson aired versus now I've gone through, just like everyone else, 6 more years of life experiences, even now a pandemic. So many things are different than they were at that time. And yet there was so much that I could still identify with, even in some of the things that I shared in that lesson. I want to talk about quickly navigating seasons of unanswered prayers. And if I'm not the only one who's gone through times where you feel like God hasn't heard you, don't leave me alone in the comments. Let me know that you know how that feels. You understand what it feels like to go through and not have the answer you want. And I mentioned in the lesson that there are seasons that God will say yes. There are some no's, there are some waits, there are some not nows, there are some laters, and life is filled with trying to get through that. But we don't like waiting. Just this morning, I was taking my mom to the airport, and with my timing, because I travel a lot, so I left in, the time that I knew that it normally takes for me to get to the airport, plus a little bit of time, to help get her through. And I did not factor in that there was construction now on the route that I take to the airport. So when I got to one point and all I saw was tail lights and cars that were sitting, it immediately put me into an, oh my goodness, I didn't like waiting. I don't want to sit. I got to get out of here. I got to figure a way around. I pulled out my map. Was there anything else I could do? Because I did not want to wait. And I think that is definitely a very active metaphor for our lives. Like immediately when we see that stopper, we feel the stopper, sense that things are not going according to the plan, like we're immediately trying to figure it out, and or worse, we give up. And so I wanted to again talk about waiting and what it is like to wait on God. And what is waiting on God, right? Waiting on God is where we don't give up, where we are waiting in a space where our hope is not diminished, where we continue to anticipate that God is going to come through, but most of all, in a space that we can trust that he is going to do what he said he will do, and in many cases, what we so very much need him to do and what we want him to do. In transparency, even as I look back at the video that the encore presentation, I kind of thought about two things this week. I thought about the fact that there are still some things that I was waiting on in that season that haven't happened. So I am still waiting. And there are things and, some things that I had on my vision board at that time that were new and they haven't happened. And so I understand. I think that is a very real life thing that all of us have, kind of this continuum of things and desires that we're always working through. And so I've been sharing with people, especially at this time of year, I don't know what it is about this fourth quarter, how easily it is for disappointment to creep in, right? As we're coming to the end of the year, an end of another cycle. And for a lot of people that represents, another time of disappointment, or another cycle that something didn't happen, or another cycle that God didn't fix something. And using this lesson, there were just a couple of things I wanted to share on how we can learn to wait. What can we do to manage through these seasons of what feels like unanswered prayers? I want to say, first of all, that wondering is normal. Wondering, when will God do it? Wondering, not if he can do it, but sometimes we're watching the clock. That's pretty normal because that's part of our expectation. Like, okay, I know you're going to do it, but when are you going to do it? Wondering is normal. But wandering is not an option. And if you look at this week's lesson, you saw that Zechariah did not stop working while he was waiting. He was in the temple doing his duty. He did not stop moving. And that's a trick of the enemy to get us to pause in our tracks and freeze up and not be able to move. But he kept doing what he was assigned to do. And I love the way I think the King James reads, and I think it says one day while he was serving. One translation says one day. NIV says once when he was on duty. So one particular day while doing his regular thing, not giving up on God, not walking out on his assignment. One day God came through for him. And I also thought about this, that just because you don't feel fruitful does not mean that you have the right to stop being faithful. Zechariah and Elizabeth were not fruitful in terms of children, but that was not an invitation for them to give up on God and not be faithful. So keep serving, keep working, serve with diligence, serve with a good attitude, learn the lessons in patience and pushing through while you're in that space, and delight yourself in the Lord while you wait on him. So don't wander. The second thing is don't waver. Do not waver. And again, I've acknowledged that our feelings and our emotions are real. And I know that we've begun to talk a lot more about our mental health and our challenges and self-care and those kinds of things. Our feelings have validity. However, we want to be careful that we never allow our feelings to override our faith. Never allow your feelings to be fuel that adds to the fire that the enemy wants to set to squash your faith. So watch your words, watch expressions of doubt, watch playing into your fears, and always allow your words to align with your faith. What does the word say about it? What does God say about it? What has he promised you? And rehearse your faith more than your fear. Don't wrestle with your trust. Do not wrestle with your trust. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean that it isn't there. Just because they couldn't see a child does not mean that there was not a child in the plan of God. There was not something in the plan that God had for their lives. The Lord remembers his promise. Remember the names, Zechariah and Elizabeth, what their names meant, and combined it means that the Lord remembers his promise. So what do we do while we're waiting? We trust God's timing. We trust God's plan. And what we have to know is that his timing, his plans, they're not random. They are perfectly arranged. They're perfectly designed just for you. I had breakfast with my mom on Saturday, and there was another table that came in behind us. And when they ordered their food, whatever they got, they kind of got like the basic, probably basic breakfasty thing. At our table, my mom had the catfish and grits, and whatever I had something with turkey bacon, and the bottom line is they run out of the meat. And so they needed to make an adjustment, and I took an alternative meat like a chicken or something, but it took a little bit longer to cook what we had ordered. And so the other table gets their food first. And my mom says, well, weren't we here before they were? And so I teased her a little bit, and I said, see, that you're not ready. You're not ready because, see, you're so busy looking at somebody else's blessing, you don't understand. You ordered something custom. You ordered something that took a little more time. I had to make a change to my order. So, of course, they got their food first. And I thought about that literally just in the scope of life. And it is true that there are times that it looks like others are winning, and it looks like they're receiving and they're getting before we are. But know that God's plan and his timing are not random, but it has been designed. What he is arranging is just for you. And those spaces that we can't fill in, we simply have to close the gap by activating our faith. Close the gap by activating your faith. While you're waiting, close the gap. Close the gap of doubt. Close the gap where the enemy will want to come in and sow seeds of doubts. Close the gap where your mouth overtalks what God is doing, and insert your faith. Silence your fears. Activate your faith. So don't wander. Don't wander. Don't waver. Don't wrestle. Those are my 3 tips for you this week. Don't wander. Don't waver. And don't wrestle with trusting God. Don't lose your trust. Don't lose your expectation. And just know that you might be like a Zechariah. And one day, you do not know when your one day is going to come. One day, God is going to remember his promise to you. This is the lesson for this week. Again, I do pray that there was something that was helpful for you. If you desire to share with this ministry, you can do so by scanning the QR code that's here on the screen and or visiting the website. And you can also use the super chat on YouTube. I appreciate your being in this ministry space. And I look forward to looking at your comments and things that you will share. If you've got questions, you can also leave those on the lesson, and we'll do our best to address those. Other than that, I love you all so much. And I will see you in Sunday school. Bye, everybody. I'm super excited to drop these new designs for both Sunday school and church school. Click the links down below for more, or visit our Teespring store for a full assortment of t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, pouches, and more. Find something great for yourself, or perhaps an amazing holiday item for a teacher or superintendent that you know.
La da da, la da 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 da, la da da, la da 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 da, la da da, la da 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 da. La da da, la da da da, la da da, la da da da, la da da, la da da. Changing the way you see Sunday school with that Sunday.